Inside Elliot's Loft, we are kicking off another episode of Common Ground. Mark Elliott, Dr. Marcy. Man, we've covered some good things, basically finding the middle. And I go back to a show we did, and this wasn't really Common Ground, but we talked about generational curse. And we tackled that, and we tackled it well. And we have been tackling a lot of things throughout the period of time there, Dr. Marcy. How you feeling?
I'm feeling fantastic. Trauma's kind of my jam. I think that's a weird thing to say, but we've got some lived experiences, we got some clinical experiences. So, it's always a good opportunity to have conversations surrounding trauma because I think so many people walk around the world carrying it and don't necessarily have the tools to start unpacking it, really being able to feel confident in talking about it unless they're in like a therapeutic setting. So this is good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And trauma basically, for some of us, we're not even realizing how it plays and how it's driving our relationships. And it's the emotional response to a distressed event, often causing long-lasting fear, helplessness, severe anxiety. It does something to security. And I guess for me, I want to kind of start right there because in a general sense, how does trauma play itself out in our relationship, or how is trauma playing itself out in our relationships?
So let me give you an example of a very casual example of how trauma can show up unexpectedly. Not necessarily in anywhere in life, but so I outside of my entrepreneurial world, I also am a crisis specialist and go out in the community and do crisis interventions, people that are feeling suicidal, homicidal, those types of things. So obviously encounter the subject of trauma a lot. So this one example, my partner and I were on coming back from a call, I think, and we pulled up next to this car that was playing really, really loud, like mariachi music. And, I'm African American, my partner is Native American, and there's this mariachi music playing. And all of a sudden, he just grabs the steering wheel and he just goes into this long tirade about his ex-wife and who was Hispanic, and how they would go on these road trips and he couldn't play anything on the radio. His wife, or if his brother-in-law or whoever was in the car, it was always this really loud mariachi music. So this mariachi music, immediately, the sound of that connected him back to his former marriage in the midst of something completely and totally unrelated. It was a 100% trigger for him. And I joked with him, I said, trigger much? And so we kind of started laughing. I said, dude, I'm like, you seem kind of traumatized. Like, I've never seen mariachi music be a trigger for, past trauma before. And so we actually kind of talked about it. And he was explaining how that was just one example of the way that he felt silenced throughout the relationship. He had no say so. He had to always capitulate to what his wife wanted, dealing with her family and what their expectations were, which were very different culturally than what he was used to, and all these types of things. And so that's a perfect example, I feel, of how trauma can just sort of show up. And so it's not even necessarily anything that you did in the relationship. It may not even be anything you said. It can be something completely external from your interaction with the individual, but there's this underlying trauma that's there. And he didn't even realize it until he had the reaction he had. And because of our field of work, I called him on it. I said, trigger much? And he immediately knew. I'm like, dude, what? Are you traumatized by that? And that's what opened up the dialogue for him to really kind of start talking about. He's like, man, I never even thought about that.
Yeah, and I think that's what's real prevalent here is that a lot of times trauma that we experienced in the past, we tend not to talk about it for various reasons. And we need to talk about it. We really need to have conversation. It's interesting how the music itself brings him back. But as I, researched a little bit, it's not that surprising because trauma basically, our brain, the amygdala part of our brain, detects danger. And what it does when it detects it, it can happen years ago, but it holds on to that emotional experience strongly. And it basically tries to prevent it happening again. So sometimes when we don't even want to kind of go back to something that may happen traumatic, our brain will kind of do the work for us and bring us back there. Therefore, it becomes arduous to move beyond the trauma for a lot of people because without your say so, without your approval, the brain moves you back there. It brings you back and it replays in a sense to try to protect you from what happened then. And I've heard people say sometimes that when trauma happens in life, I want to get your opinion on this one, Dr. Marcy. I've heard people, say whether it's correct or not, sometimes our maturity, our thought process, our growing up doesn't go past the date of the trauma.
Hmm.
Is that somewhat accurate?
It is somewhat accurate. And yeah, you're right. The amygdala is the part of the brain that kind of manages like emotions. It connects your memory to the emotions. And so that's why in those instances, that's why you don't necessarily move past that developmentally. And so you hear people say things like arrested development. And that's what it means, is that for whatever reason, your development sort of paused at a certain point in time. And if you are somebody who uses drugs or alcohol, especially at a very young age, that's why that has such a lasting impact on you as well, because that has a direct connection to the amygdala as well. So the human body in general is a really amazing thing, and we have this ability to adapt. And part of that is learning how to hold on to things. And so you learn how to recognize, like, we recognize danger based off memory. So you see fire, you learn fire is hot. Your brain has to remember fire is hot, don't touch fire, right? Um, some people have to experience the fire in order for their brain to really register it. And so they talk about, touching the hot stove. Well, like, you just had to touch the hot stove. Like, I could tell you 100 times that it's hot, and you're gonna know that it's hot, but you're not gonna believe that it's hot. You're not gonna understand the effects of it being hot until you actually touch the stove. And now all of a sudden your brain is like, oh snap, don't do that again. Because now that became the trauma of you touching it, versus I tried to prevent you from being traumatized by telling you all these things, but you insisted on experiencing it, and then now we adapt. And so we either adapt on the scale of I'm not going to do that anymore, to I'm going to keep on trying it to see if I can kind of overtake it. And that's a very extreme response to trauma, but it's really common. And you see that a lot also in domestic violence relationships, where you have these periods of, where things are really, really calm. And then you have periods where things are escalated. And then you have periods maybe where they're really volatile and violent. And you would think that you get through it, but your brain remembers that all times aren't bad times. So it just needs to get through this so that I can get to the good time again. And so adaptability can be a blessing and it can be a curse, because it can put us into harm's way just as much as it can prevent us from being in harm's way.
That's very interesting, especially the adaptability part, because let's take a look at someone that was an abusive relationship. And even if it wasn't physically abusive, let's say it was emotionally, verbally abusive relationship. Now they move on to someone that doesn't fit that criteria. They're basically trying to develop and work with this person. And unbeknown to them, there's certain things that's going on in their relationship that are bringing this person back mentally to those times. And the question, I guess, could be, how do the person that experienced that abusive part, how do they find themselves to start fresh and really work inside of a new relationship? Is that, I know it's not going to be easy, but how can they handle that? How can they adapt to that and move into that?
So I think a lot of it is unpacking, and that, there's a lot of jokes in psychology about, oh, everything goes back to your childhood, everything's a mother wound or a father wound type of thing. But our environment in our early development years, especially under the age of 7, but 0 to 13 are very crucial developmental years. And so 0 to 7 specifically, we really learn how to navigate the world. So we learn good from bad. We learn happy and sad. We learn our colors. We learn language. We learn space. But that's also where we learn love and how to experience love. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see kids who have grown up, maybe they end up in the foster care system at a very early age, let's say, 2, 3 years old. They have a hard time forming attachments later on in life because those early developmental years under the age of 7, they didn't have any real attachments. So now I've gone through this, I've survived all these things, but I've lived my entire life in survival mode. And so survival mode isn't necessarily conducive to love. It's conducive to survival. And so now as an adult, I go into a relationship and all I know how to do is operate in survival mode. So the abusive relationship, so some of us only recognize abusive relationships if they're physical. We don't recognize verbal abuse as verbal abuse because that was our norm. That's what we grew up with. That was normal to us. Chaos for the fly is not chaos for the spider. If that's what I grew up in, so then I get into this relationship and I equate angst, I equate emotional turbulence, I equate sometimes violence with love. And especially if you grew up in a household where your parents were abusive to one another and you see the cycle, as a child, you don't understand that that's a cycle of violence. You understand that's what love looks like. So now I go into a relationship and I'm trying with all my survival skills to figure out how do I navigate this relationship. So if I'm coming into relation with an individual who came from a loving home, who was given words of affirmation, who was given hugs and kisses and, had good holiday experiences, and all of mine were turbulent and full of turmoil and chaos, that's either going to feel boring to me or I'm going to feel like I'm an outsider. And so I may have a tendency to try and create the chaos and the turbulence that I need so that I can be comfortable in my survival mode.
Dr. Marcy, you just basically laid down what drama looks like to someone that doesn't like drama. Because I'm sure
Yeah.
we heard many times that people will say, I don't like drama, but they find themselves in a relationship where drama is constantly being created. And listening to you is that what if they're not bringing back or going back to what they're used to, what they know, they will basically like the match to have that.
Right.
And if you're in a relationship with someone, as you said, that didn't have that as a child, and they're basically like, what the hell is this person doing? They're not understanding that this is what's inside of them. This is what they need to feel normal. And it seems like the non-drama part to them is scary. It doesn't feel safe. It feels awkward. So it's like they
Absolutely.
almost pull back into, almost like a rubber band. They pull back into what they know. And this is the part that's amazing, because a lot of times the person that's not pulling back, we're sitting at them looking at them like, what the hell's wrong with them? Even if we know some bits about their childhood or their upbringing, we're not quick to associate they're trying to emulate to feel a certain way, to feel normal. Even if that was, crazy back then, they need that just to basically feel normal. And I think a lot of times we look at that and go, are they trying to break that cycle? Or are they just trying to basically keep it going?
Well, and like I said, it's because so we were talking about the amygdala and how you can get stuck in these early development stages, right? That early development stage is one of chaos. It's one of um, confusion. And so if I'm stuck there, and that's where I know how to survive, like I learned how to survive chaos. I learned how to survive and raise my siblings when my mom was, in the depth of addiction. I learned to figure out how to make my own meals and get to school because, my dad beat my mom and she couldn't come out of the house, or whatever the case may be. There's all these different things that are happening behind closed doors. And we get stuck emotionally in it. So mentally, I know that it was a wrong environment. I've grown up. I know that that was wrong, but I don't realize and I don't connect that there's an emotional tendency that I have to try and retreat to that environment because, as chaotic as it is, that's where I learned how to survive. I know how to, you know, make something out of nothing. I learned how to make ramen when I was 4. You know what I'm saying? And so there's a certain part of you that wants to retreat back to that. There's another piece of that where, especially with victims of violence, or maybe kids who were mistreated, like child abuse, child neglect, those types of things, there's something called Stockholm syndrome, where the individual wants more than anything to please the abuser, wants to please the offender. And they learn, like, okay, if I just do this or I just do this, then, you know, I can get this outcome, or they're not going to hit me this time. And so they'll go at far lengths to please this individual. So now take that to a grown up relationship, and you got all your friends saying, bro, your girl is crazy. She's toxic. She's this, she's that. But you grew up in chaos. So her behavior doesn't shock you. It doesn't surprise you. It might piss you off sometimes. And she may embarrass you in public sometimes. But at the end of the day, you feel like you kind of get it. You understand her. And everybody's telling you, like, bro, get out of that. But you're like, no, like, I can fix it. And that's the other piece of childhood trauma. Like, we want to fix stuff. Like, we want to fix wounds we didn't create. And we're not able to do that. But yet and still we'll continue to try over and over and over and over repeatedly and continue to just be hurt in the effort to either remain in chaos or to fix what we couldn't fix as a child.
That's the point there, the fixing part. And a lot of times you see people with people and that's what they're thinking. If I could just fix this, I'll have the diamond in the rough I was looking for. If I can just get this if I can do, there's other qualities there, but if I could just fix this, I can have. And a lot of times, like you said, they can't. And they're spending valuable time trying to get that person to where they want them to be, and that person may not be trying to get there. And as I listen, this might be going off the rail a little bit. Some things you feel in your heart, and when I feel stuff in my heart, I just come out when I speak it. And I listened to you talked about the early childhood, what we learn in those early ages of our lives and what we miss out on, and a lot of things, how that predetermines how we kind of grow up and how we live as individuals. And when I hear that, and I'm not saying that none of that's new to me, but it says to me as parents, parents, we misunderstand and misvalue the importance, the role that we play in our children's lives. And for that reason, I think that's part of the reason why there are a lot of therapist offices are loaded and backloaded with clients, because we're not really understanding the role that we play and what we should be giving our children at these stages of their lives. And we're missing that, and we have been missing that for a long period of time. And it's I know when you become pregnant, or a man and woman gets together and they decide to have a child, no one gives you a handbook and says this, but in reality, there's more to just having sex and producing a child. And realistically, once you decide to do that and you have a responsibility to raise that child throughout those years, to give that child what it needs throughout those years. And some will say, how can they, when they don't learn, simply learn? And I'm not saying it's simple to learn, but why would you want to pass that on to your seed, your child? To me, if you experience some things, and just me talking, if you experience some things through those times in your life that you're dealing with, and it has put trauma and long-lasting impact on your life, why are you bringing that to your child? That's more reason why your child should have to deal with that. Now, that's just me speaking. And it's, I look at that and I go, wow, because, when you think of what we're supposed to get, like you said earlier, the hugs, the reaffirmation, all of that. And these kids aren't getting it, many of them. And to me, that should be a natural occurrence for any kid that comes out of the womb. It should damn near be law. It should be standard. It should be. And there's no way you can make it law, but why is it not? That's just, we take that responsibility on as parents, as men and women, to make sure that our kids are getting what they need to be strong-minded individuals once they grow up. It's almost like we talk about kids, we act like we love them, but we don't give a shit about them. We really don't. At the end of the day, we don't. Other than sometimes dressing them up and making them look pretty, people give you compliments, but do we spend time mentally really plugging into our children, our youth, and really working with them? Not, youth, how about your damn kids? And, to me, that's it. And I'm pretty sure I kind of went off on rail a little bit, but Dr. Marcy, that's how I feel. And, that's what I feel. And I've been a father since I was 16, going on 17. No one had to sit me down for me to care for my children and say, hey, Mark, do this. Realistic, other than God, that's where it came from, in the heart that I have inside of my fucking body. So when I see individuals that were, treated wrong as kids, yes, it angers me. It does. Because I'm no different. I'm no special than anyone else. But how did I know that child was going to need me, the part of a father, to be what it needs to be when it grow older? How did I get that? And they didn't, regardless of what my mother and father did to me, regardless. So that's just my personal feelings that I have when I come to that. Because a lot of times we're setting our kids up in so many bad ways, setting them up. And then guess what? We just keep having them. Just keep having them. So if you want to respond to that, you can. If not, I'll bring it back to the emotional safety that, someone needs inside a relationship when they're dealing with trauma.
So a few things. First of all, I want to point out not all kids are wanted. And I'm going to let that sit there. And we got to be honest about that. Not all kids are wanted. Kids are accidents. Kids are born from rape. Kids are born from incest. Kids are born from trauma. There's, like you said, we talked about generational curses, generational systems, all that kind of stuff, but there's also generational traumas. You hear terms like mother wounds, father wounds. There was a study done, I want to say, might have been Harvard, I don't know, it was some Ivy League school, I can't remember off the top of my head. But they did a study using mice, and it was a study on trauma and the effects of trauma and how many generations does trauma affect. And on the study, they they infused the scent of cherry blossoms with these mice, and every time they infused the scent of cherry blossoms, they shocked the rodent. And they did that repeatedly. And then the next generation, they did that again. And then for the following 3 to 4 or 5 generations, they stopped doing that. 6 to 7 generations in, they still negatively reacted to the scent of cherry blossoms, even though they were never physically exposed to the stimuli. So, what has happened to our parents, our grandparents, and our great grandparents, and our great great grandparents show up in our DNA? Like, trauma has been shown in these studies to actually alter our genetic makeup. So, when you go into the situation, like I said, where not all kids are wanted, you're looking at those parents like, okay, how did they grow up? And how did their parents grow up? What was that upbringing like? What lessons did they learn? And so now I've got this genetic coding that's a part of it, but then I also have the physical rearing of a child. I have belief systems that were formed in early childhood that have been carried out. And then we look at, how did the child get here? Was a child born out of uh, a loving, respectful union? Or was it born from incest? Was it born from rape? Was it a teen pregnancy? Was it an accident? Was it a whatever the case may be? And how kids got here, oftentimes, not saying that it should, but oftentimes affects how they're responded to and raised growing up. How many kids, especially when we look at our community, are raised by their grandparents and not their parents? We can say our grandparents gave us a loving home. Our grandparents, made sure we had food on a table, we had clothes on our back, whoop, 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 whoop. But at the end of the day, our grandparents are not our parents. And as a child, what I needed was my parent, genetically, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. I needed my parent. A grandparent can't be a parent, just like a mother can't be a father. You can't make up as a mom and overcompensate for the absence of a father. A father is a father, and vice versa. A father can't overcompensate for the absence of a mother. So all of these elements play into how a child formulates their space in the world. And so, yeah, it would be great to say all kids deserve love. They absolutely do. We can all say it's not the child's fault they didn't ask to be here. They absolutely did not. But the reality is, not all kids are wanted, not all kids are loved, and they're not going to be raised that way. But for the most part, they're all going to grow up at some point and be in relation and now potentially become someone else's parent. And that's how this stuff kind of goes on from generation to generation. So one of the things you said was how, when I had my son at 17, I think you said son, my child at 17, nobody had to tell me how to be a father. So let me ask you, what was your upbringing like?
Father was there. He was
And
there.
what did you see? Was you raised with love? Was you raised with...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, both sides, mother and father, grandmother was raised with mommy and dad. As you spoke about the grandparents, no, they were there. They played a part. But yeah, I had that family unit. Absolutely.
Right. So you knew, even though you were 17, you might not have been quite ready to be nobody daddy because you're still developing, your brain's still developing until you're like 25. In general, you were shown what family looks like. You had an example and a role model of what being a father looks like, what being a man requires. Not all men have that. Not all women get that. I've shared a number of times on different black when black men talk, and then here also on Common Ground about my upbringing, the daddyless daughter syndrome, and how you can't replace that. that biological father, right? So when I grew up, my mom referred to my father as a biological factor. She said things to me like, he never wanted you. He wanted me to have an abortion. She said it from the standpoint of, I loved you enough for two people, was what she was trying to drive home. Like, she said that statement, but I heard the first part. Your dad never wanted you. He wanted me to have an abortion with you, aka, in my mind as a child, he wanted me to be dead. I grew up with that. I learned to navigate the world with that self-belief that I didn't belong here. And the fact that I was biracial, I never really felt like I fit in with the white side of my family. So I had like this double edged sort of like identity crisis going on where I didn't feel like I belonged in the family, but more importantly, I didn't feel like I belonged in the world. And I certainly didn't know how to navigate relationships with males. So then when I'm 6, in comes my stepfather, who was also Black. And with him came his family. So my grandmother, cousins, aunties, uncles, all the stuff that comes with that. So the majority of my young childhood, I would say from 6 to 13, still in those critical learning periods, was I tended to gravitate more towards his family, even though that wasn't my biological family. But the caveat to that was he was abusive and he was an alcoholic. So at home, he beat my mother every weekend. And then come Monday morning, everybody pretended like everything was fucking okay until Friday night when he got paid, the check got cashed, everybody had dinner, and then he walked out the door. And when he came home Saturday morning in the wee hours, there was a smell. I didn't know what the smell was at the time, but I learned later it was alcohol. And then the fight would start. They would fight, they would cry, he would hit, she would cry. Like, come Sunday and Monday morning, everything's fucking okay again. And that's how I learned to navigate the world. So for me, chaos, violence, trauma was normal. And then the part of his family that I had come to rely on as sort of my escape which was his family. One of his younger brothers ended up molesting me when I was 12. So let's add that into it. Still within that critical learning period, under age of 13. I have my mom telling me men ain't shit. I have my mom making all these promises that she's going to leave this relationship, but yet she stays. And I am trying to figure it out. So I say all that to say, even though I knew by the time I got to adulthood that all that shit was wrong, when I was 17 and I got pregnant the very first time I had sex, I had an abortion. I live with that decision to this day. But at 17, 5 years after I was just molested, you think I was ready to be somebody's mother? To a boy who wouldn't even talk to me anymore? And so you take all of that, and that's just my story, and that's just a snippet of my story. You take all of that, and you try and package that into a pretty little bow and become somebody's wife, and somebody's mother, and somebody's great employee, and all these other things, and we wonder why we fail epically. Epically, we fail. Continuously, we fail. Not for lack of trying, but none of that was ever unpacked. I had to wait until after I became a victim of domestic violence before I unpacked any of that. And I was, what, 40 years old, 41? And it took all of that for me to even realize that going all the way back to before I was born, it wasn't that he didn't want me. He didn't want a child with her. I didn't even exist. I wasn't even a person then. I was a thought. I was an idea. I was still an egg. But I grew up taking that shit personally, and it wasn't personal. It didn't have nothing to do with me. But because of the messages that I was told, that affected my identity. And then I acted that out through promiscuity and all kinds of other stuff, substance use when I was in high school, all kinds of stuff. And then you want me to be somebody's mom at 17? Yeah, nah, not doing that. But now in my 50s, I'm still living with the consequences of a choice that I made at 17 that I wasn't even equipped to make. Being in a position I should have never been in. That's how trauma works.
It's When Black Men Talk, Dr. Marcy Mark Elliott. We're talking about trauma and a sense of a relationship. But I wanted to ask of Dr. Marcy, and thank you for sharing that. That's a lot to unpack. A
It
lot to
is.
unpack. Yeah. How did that, which when you had your children, how did that affect you raising your children?
So the second time I got pregnant, I was with a guy I met in high school. He was very safe. And so he very much wanted to get married. He loved me. But based on what I was told, men ain't shit. My mom said she never wanted to get married. So I never wanted to get married. But I got married because I didn't want my daughter to go through what I had went through. So I had committed. I was never going to have another abortion because I was living with that emotionally at that time. And so I went ahead and eventually married him when my daughter was 4 months old. My oldest daughter was 4 months old. And then I had my second one because I didn't want my first one to be an only child. That's how trauma makes decisions. I didn't want to. I didn't want to marry him. I didn't want to get. I literally didn't even really want to be married at the time. But I didn't want my daughter to go through what I had went through. And one thing my ex-husband never was abusive. He was emotionally absent and didn't really know how to emotionally connect. But in my young mind at the time, I was 20. I was 20 when I got pregnant with my oldest daughter. In my young mind, at least he wasn't hitting me. So that became the measuring stick.
Okay. But based on the interaction with your mother, how did that play with the interaction with you and your two children?
So, me and my oldest daughter are super, super close. Me and my younger daughter are finding our way back. We were very close up until the point that I got divorced. Everyone felt like I had ripped the family apart. But for me, it was the first time that I made a decision that was for me. And so I had to deal with all of the collateral damage, all of the consequences that came with that. And part of that was my kids were kind of like shocked because I had lived my whole life, Mark, with a mask on. Like I'd learned how to make everything look like it was supposed to look. I had a good job. I was a bank executive, had a nice house in one of the nicest neighborhoods, up on the hill, brick house, like Labrador retrievers. When I tell you, I made it look how it was supposed to look, baby, it looked right. But inside, I was a functional train wreck. And at what point do you decide you're going to get off the tracks and do what you need to do for you? I was at the point where my kids were, my youngest one was just starting high school. My oldest one was getting ready to start her senior year. And I'm looking down the road like, these kids finna be out of here and I'm be stuck with this man that I don't even like. I don't know. We have nothing in common. We barely talk. So I made a decision for myself. And so, my youngest daughter, she's very much like her dad. And so that's why we tend to butt heads a lot. But so we're not as close. But I definitely think that, especially raising the girls when they were younger, I overcompensated. Like, for him not coming to events and stuff, like he was always in the home and they have a good relationship, but he just wasn't that dad. Like when they would have activities and stuff, he never went. When I had stuff for work, he never went. Recognition ceremonies, he never went. Like he was just absent like that. And so there was a lot of overcompensating that I did. And so for me to then go from that overcompensating standpoint to a complete 180 and say, I want a divorce. Because in my mind, I had committed, like, I'm going to get these girls through high school and then I'm going to get the divorce. Like, I always knew I was getting divorced. And I would say that, like, to my friends, like, oh, like, my next husband, blah, 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 blah. Like, it was never, like, that was never a permanent thing for me. It was a reason why I got married. And it wasn't love.
But your upbringing from, let's say, 1 to 7, or let's say 1 to 12, how did that impact your daughters at those points in their lives?
Um, from a genetic standpoint, I feel like both of my daughters have went through some things um that I think were related to that genetic coding, you know what I mean? Um, to this day, neither one of them are married. Um, so I feel like there is lasting impact there. I can't, neither one of them were never, um, like I said, my ex-husband wasn't abusive or anything like that. So all in all, they had a good childhood, but their trauma came from my divorce. And my younger daughter kind of took that a little bit harder than my older daughter. And I remember my younger one telling me at the time, she said, I was trying to explain to her, she was asking questions about the divorce, and I was trying to explain to her why I was getting a divorce. And I said to her, like, mommy hasn't been happy for a really, really long time. But I never really wanted to say why. I never wanted to put anything on her dad or anything like that, because it literally, it wasn't him specifically. I made a choice and I was living the consequence and I wasn't happy. He was always who he was. And so she said to me, well, if you knew when I was 4, why didn't you do it then? And I said, well, I wanted to try and make it work. She said, well, it didn't work. And at least if you would have did it when I was 4, then this would be normal. I was like, ouch.
Yeah,
I was the babes, like
I was
kids
going to
raising
say,
mama. Like,
you took the words out of
damn.
my mouth, the babes. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she wasn't wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't. Yeah, you're right. And I don't have an answer for that.
It seems to me as I listen, I'm going to change gears in a second. But it seems to me all that you've been through when you became a mom, you sheltered them from that. That you
100%.
see, and that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm respecting. And that's kind of goes back to some things I said earlier. But I want to do this because here's the thing that I think we know, we don't know, is that our trauma, in a sense, plays a part in the next person we choose to basically sometimes gives our heart to. It almost seems like sometimes we date a certain person, it didn't work out, but the next person we find ourselves with may have a different name, but they're identical.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma is swimming around the bottom. As you spoke earlier, we're used to, if you're used to certain things and those things seem more normal to you, you're going to attract a person that's basically going to, kind of fill that need in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Complain about it.
they say we attract what we are, not what we want.
Hmm.
And so that's why, in order to be able to really kind of change the trajectory of what your life and your loves and your relationships look like, you have to change yourself. So that has to start with the man or the woman in the mirror. To quote Michael Jackson, that's where we're starting, because that's the source. Like for me, with my domestic violence relationship, I realized exactly what you were saying. In different ways, I was dating the same person with a different face and a different name over and over and over again. And me, was the common denominator. They didn't know each other. They didn't know my past. They didn't know my history. I came from a if you like me, I like you standpoint. So, okay. Like I still didn't at that point feel like I knew or that I even deserved to be in the world, let alone to know how to choose love for, or what love should really look or feel like. And so I chose it based off of sexual attraction. I chose it off of excitement. I chose it off of fun. Um, all the wrong reasons. I chose my marriage off of, well, he's not going to hit me and he's not going to leave me. That's not no criteria to pick a husband. Like, what the hell?
Oh my.
Um, yeah, so um yeah, it's interesting. And so I think that's why trauma is kind of my jam, is because my lived experience is such a good testimony for what you can accomplish for yourself if you're willing to get like nakedly honest, brutally honest with yourself, and hold yourself accountable for your choices. Like, nobody made me have sex and whatever when I was 17. Nobody put a gun to my head and made me have an abortion. I made those choices. I didn't choose to be molested when I was 12, but I chose not to say anything. He told me nobody would believe me. The one person that I thought would believe me, which was my cousin, I told her, she didn't believe me. That reinforced what he said. And I never told another soul until I was into my 40s and wrote my first book. I think that was the first time I really put it out there. So people hold on to this trauma, and like we don't even understand that it's trauma that's driving our choices until we start to unpack why we make some of the choices. And I think there has to be something that kind of kicks it off, where you're forced to start looking at, like, how in the hell did I get here? And for
Yeah.
me, that was domestic violence.
Yeah. It's amazing. You meet people throughout your lifetime, and when they start to tell you where they've been, how they got here, what they've been through, and you look at who they've become, and you're floored. You are, because you say to yourself, how did they swim through all those channels and present themselves like this? And by the grace of God is what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
realistically, you know, you had so many things, and not only you, many others had so many things that could have basically taken them away, had them live a totally different life. And when you're Dr. Marcy and you're speaking, and we're doing this, and the work you do with other people, it's amazing that you are who you are based on the road you travel. And that's, for me, is the great. And I say, look at God for the grace of God, because a lot of others have taken different avenues and different routes, maybe even experienced something less than you have and something less other people have. And they end up totally different. So, I know I pat you on the back a lot, not based on your past. I pat you on the back because you're an amazing woman. You're brilliant, you're smart, and your conversation, you're open-minded. So, I'm just hoping that when I'm not patting you on the back, you'll find a way to pat yourself.
Oh, look at you being all sweet. Thank you. No, in all seriousness, though, you brought up a good point. But for the grace of God, and I would be remiss if I did not point out the number of times that I had to take my hands off the wheel and just be like, God, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. You handle it. And I mean, I got multiple testimonies that he always comes through. And so, if anybody's questioning, like, what does their relationship with their faith look like, or their relationship with God, I just encourage everybody to formulate your own relationship with whatever your higher power is. It could be a purple polka dotted unicorn. I really don't care. But there has to be something, someone, someplace out there that you can really completely just let go of the wheel. Like, we cannot, as human individuals, navigate this life all by ourselves. Like, you're going to have a tribe around you at some point. You're going to have some sort of a faith or a spiritual relationship. Mine is with God. Do I go to church all the time? Nope. Do I pray every single day? Nope. But do I have a relationship where periodically through the day I can be, ooh, listen to me, Lord. Dear God, it's me again, the problem child. Like, that's that type of relationship where God is like another guiding force in my life. So I don't have to go seek him out. I know he's always there. And it's just a matter of, for me, he be sitting there. I tell you, him and my guardian angel be sitting there like, oh, Lord, here she go again. Like, girl, just let us handle it. But I be trying to hold on to stuff and I be trying to figure it out myself. And when it gets too much, that's when I'm willing to let go. And that's usually when it gets better.
All things happen for a reason, whether it's good or bad. And someone hear me say that and go, we talking about the bad? No, they do. But I say that to say that how we find ourselves doing what we do on this show, Lady Marcy, realistically, how we bring the conversation, how we bring the vulnerability, how we bring the openness, it's no coincidence. It isn't. It really isn't. It's put together masterfully with us really doing nothing but just basically showing up. And I want to thank you for showing up. I really do. Sincerely from the heart.
What'd you say? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
No, I said I want to thank you for showing up. Sincerely from the heart. Because all the conversations you and I have had, the conversation you and I will probably get into, and the things we have discussed, the things that we are not afraid to open up and really speak on, to me, this is not a coincidence. It's not. It can't be this good and be a coincidence. That's not the reality. So when things really work, because all things work for the good. So when things really work the way we're working, the way we're speaking, the vulnerability that we're sharing, not afraid to open up. And when we all put that together, and, it's not really our doing. It was done long before we even thought about it.
Yeah, I tell, I even tell clients that sometimes when I'm doing crisis interventions, but sometimes our traumas are our training ground. And, I found myself in a number of situations over the years, both with my kids, with my clients, things like that, where if I hadn't had some of the experiences I had, I couldn't relate to them in the way that they need, and I couldn't connect to them in the moment that they need to be connected with. And so, good, bad, or otherwise, I feel like God already knew what my purpose was. I kind of took some back roads along the way. Um, but eventually I kind of found my groove, and then I'm able to show up for other people in a way that is 100% authentic and that allows them to sometimes get through some situations that they don't think they can get through. So I'm always going to be grateful for it. I don't, people always say that cliche, oh, I wouldn't change a thing. Yeah, there's some shit I would change for sure. But
All right. Well, I'm gonna thank you again for showing up, and you know what you do. Yeah. Thank you for being you. Ain't the first time I said that to you, but I'll say it again. Thank you for being you, and thank you for showing up. I appreciate it.
for sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to basically close the door. Elliot's Loft on this one. We'll get together real soon. As always, we're grateful. We're grateful that you decide to give an ear. Never forget that God loves you, and we love you too. Take care of yourself.